Should the Buffalo Bills trade up for a wide receiver in the 2024 NFL Draft? Stick and pick, trade back, trade for a vet. We're going to explore all the options today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time to explore all the different possibilities that the Buffalo Bills have in front of them to add meaningful wide receiver help to this roster. Stefon Diggs traded away. He's a member of the Houston Texans, and there is room for this team to add big-time help at wide receiver. And so I want to explore the idea of moving way up, the idea of moving a little bit up, trading for a veteran like Brandon Aiyuk or Tee Higgins. Also the idea of moving back. We're going to assess the merit of all of these different options and hopefully by the end of this, arrive at the right conclusion for what Brandon Beane should get done here. But as I teased on yesterday's episode, the herd mentality episode, I guess I dropped it on Sunday night. I guess it's the Monday episode, whatever you want to call it. The last episode before this one, I talked about the room on this roster for targets in the passing game. You figure Josh Allen's going to throw the football 600 times. And between Dalton Kincaid, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, James Cook, and Dawson Knox, who I think you can project as the top 5 options currently in this passing game, I think you got about 400 targets right there. And obviously a lot of those going to Dalton Kincaid. I'm thinking 120 or more targets for him. But then I still think you add it all up and you're getting around 400 targets, maybe a little more, maybe 420, 425, something like that. But as I said, Josh Allen's going to throw the football 600 times. You have room for at least 150, 180, maybe even 200 targets for this passing game. And you need to find some meaningful answers or a meaningful answer. And so I do want to start this conversation with the idea of moving way up the board. I get a lot of questions right now, or I'm getting a lot of questions right now about, what do you think about the Bills trading up for one of these big receivers? Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Odunze. Those are, big-time wide receiver prospects. They're all likely going in the top 10, if not the top 8, maybe the top 7. They're going to go early, and they should. I was asked a question yesterday about where Harrison, Nabers, and Odunze, where do they factor in over the last 3 years of wide receiver prospects? And as I shared, I grade prospects on a numerical scoring way. In that way, year over year, I can compare prospects. And so when you look at this draft class and the last 2, these 3 guys, very clearly the best 3 receivers that I've evaluated over the last 3 years. And so that's what really sparks this conversation. Do you go get one of them? In addition to, well, the Bills now have this extra second-round pick in 2025. They also have this huge need with Stefon Diggs no longer in the mix. So I want to start there, moving way up. And when I look at the teams that the Bills could move way up with, you think about the Giants at 6, the Titans at 7, and the Falcons at 8. And the big question that I have for myself is, who's going to want to move back? Now, obviously, you're going to give them things that's going to make them want to do it, but those teams are going to be, you're asking them to trade away from awesome players. The Giants have a huge need at wide receiver. They should probably just stick and pick one of them at 6. The Titans at number 7, massive need at offensive tackle. Joe Alt is going to be sitting right there for them, most likely. And then you get to the Falcons at number 8, and that's the team. That's the one that makes the most sense to me as your partner to trade up with. In Atlanta, obviously a big offseason, bringing in Kirk Cousins, signing Darnell Mooney. They can shift their attention to the defensive side of the football. And maybe they don't feel like the value is going to be there at number 8. So they would like to move back. So they're the most logical team for me in terms of who would be the right team to have a partner with to move up. But you're still asking them to move way back, 20 spots out of the top 10 to pick 28. So what would it take to get this deal done? Well, I look at 2 historical examples to give us an idea of what that trade compensation would look like. I think the first one you look at is the Julio Jones trade. The Atlanta Falcons moving up from pick 27 to get to number 6 with the Cleveland Browns to get Julio Jones. And what did they give up for that? Well, of course, they gave up 27. They gave up 27, their second-round pick, their fourth-round pick, and the following year's first and fourth-round pick to get to number 6 and draft Julio Jones. That's a ton. The other trade that I look at is the Bills trade with the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. The Bills went from 10 to 27, and the Chiefs gave up 27, 91, which is a third-round pick, and their first-round pick the following year. I think those are reasonable examples to point to give us an idea as to what it's going to take to get that deal done. Now, you also have to keep this in mind. The NFL knows that the Bills have a huge need at wide receiver. I like Curtis Samuel. I like Khalil Shakir. I like Mac Hollins. But you certainly look at this depth chart and realize that they're missing a number 1 guy. And if I'm the Falcons or a team that the Bills are calling and I know that they're pretty desperate, I'm going to drive up that cost as much as I possibly can. Their Bills have Josh Allen. They're a contending team with a huge hole at number 1 wide receiver. I'm going to make you pay for it. So what is this going to take to make this type of a move? Well, I think you're looking at, of course, pick 28. I think you're looking at pick 60. Your first-round pick in 2025 and another day 2 pick, whether that's a second-round pick or a third-round pick. I think that's what it cost. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't want to give up 60. You're going to ask a team to go from 8 to 28, and the only thing that you're going to give them this year, you're not giving them anything this year. They're just moving back 20 spots. Surely they're going to want something this year. If I'm in Atlanta, I'm not even continuing the conversation if 60 is not in the equation here. So I think it costs you 28, 60, your first-round pick next year, and a day 2 pick next year. I think that's what it costs you. And on one hand, you get very excited. You can get Odunze or Malik Nabers, right? You're really excited about that. Those are awesome prospects. But can we be honest for a second? There is a level of arrogance required to make a move like that. To think that you're going to part with 4 of your best draft assets over the next 2 drafts to get 1 player. You're giving away 4 chances at landing a starter for 1 chance at landing a starter. Now, I understand that it's a great chance at a really talented prospect, but the guy's never played a down in the NFL. You're giving away stuff that you should trade to get a quarterback for a wide receiver in a world where you don't have to have a top 10 pick to get a meaningful wide receiver. The NFL has been extremely kind in producing wide receivers outside of the first round. Think about some of the best receivers in the game right now. A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Stefon Diggs. These guys weren't first-round picks. They were second-round picks. Some of them day 3 picks. Puka Nacua was just a 5th rounder. Cooper Kupp was a 2nd rounder. Tee Higgins was a 2nd rounder. There's no correlation between getting a number one wide receiver and picking one in the top 10. That's not a thing. So you're going to give away your 4 best chances through the draft to get starters for a chance at 1. I have a hard time swallowing that pill. I'm not going to lie. If the Bills did it, I'd be really excited in terms of hoping that that player is this answer, this Julio Jones type player. But these guys, I mean, I don't think that's a fair, that's so much, the expectations would be so high. And you have other needs. Like, can we pause for a second? I know that this need at wide receiver is glaring and obvious. I get it, but it's not the only thing that this roster needs. So giving away your 4 best chances through the draft at adding meaningful talent on a rookie deal that could be starters for 1 is one heck of a gamble. It's one heck of a roll of the dice, especially in a deep, talented wide receiver class when the NFL's proven time and time again, you don't have to pick a player in the top 10 to get an answer to be a number 1 receiver. So I think there's a lot to consider there. I think it's fully on the table. You know, Brandon Beane, that second round pick, that extra 2 that he has next year, already burning a hole in his pocket. You know how he is. So when I think about this idea of this major swing, go way up the board, this is the stuff on my mind. I think it's a possibility. I'm certainly not overly eager to get that done. All right, so the Bills could trade up for a wide receiver, and it doesn't have to be all the way into the top 10 for one of those top 3. There's other ways that they can do that. I'm going to explore that in addition to the idea of trading for Aiyuk or Higgins here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. Have you ever considered what you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you exercise, read, spend time with a friend, maybe catch up on some sleep? A lot of us live our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you. Make it a priority. Therapy can help you find out what matters most to you so you can do more of it. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who've experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire. That'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, folks, let's explore the idea of the Bills trading up, but not all the way up. What if they just traded to pick 12 or pick 13, and the idea was to move up for Brian Thomas Jr., the other wide receiver out of LSU? So I want to get into that in addition to some veteran options here as we continue this conversation. So they don't trade up for one of those big 3, and they pivot to Brian Thomas Jr., who's an appealing wide receiver prospect. I think for the consensus, he's wide receiver 4. I have him as my 5th wide receiver. A lot of speed, a lot of size, good vertical ability. But I still think a player that needs some work, right? I think his short to intermediate route running is a question. Yards after catch rate. There's some things that you need to see him develop at the next level. So this is a drop-off, right? I mean, there's a reason we talk about the big 3, and then there's the next tier. This is the next tier. So what would it take to trade up for him, and where would you have to get to secure his services? The 2 teams that make the most sense to me are the Denver Broncos at 12, Las Vegas Raiders at 13. Both of those teams, big-time need at quarterback. You know, they're not going to be in competition to go get one of those big 4 quarterbacks, because I think 3 come off the board with the first 3 picks, and then you start talking about Arizona and the Chargers as potential trade-up spots for Minnesota, who has a lot more to offer than Denver or Vegas. So could Denver or Vegas, as teams that are, you know, very much in ways rebuilding and retooling, would they look at an opportunity to move back as something that they're interested in? I could talk myself into that, and I think this probably gets you into the range where you're going to be able to get Brian Thomas if this is what you want to do. So a couple of historical trades that make sense to me to consider within this conversation. You go back to the Saints back in, I think it was 2017. they traded up to get Marcus Davenport, who was an edge rusher out of UTSA. They went from 27 to 14. And so this is somewhat similar. We're talking about going from 28 to 13 or 28 to 12. So 27 to 14 cost them, of course, 27, their first round pick next year, and a fifth round pick. That doesn't, I mean, I'm not giving up 2 first round picks to get Brian Thomas. I wouldn't do that. No way. But maybe that was just a massive overspend by the New Orleans Saints. And I think you look at a more recent trade between the Lions and Vikings in 2022, and maybe that's a better blueprint for the Bills to follow. So the Lions and Vikings did a trade in 2022. The Lions came up from 32 to 12. They wanted to get a wide receiver, actually, Jamison Williams. So they went from 32 to 12 to get Jamison Williams. And here's what that deal looked like. The Lions gave up 32, 34, and 66 for 12 and 46. I'll never understand for the rest of my life why the Vikings gave up 46 in that trade, but they did. So what it winds up being is the Lions go from 32 to 12. They move back 12 spots in the second round, so from 34 to 46, and then they're also that high third-round pick 66. I think there's a chance 28 and 60 gets you to 13. I think reasonably that's a possibility. Maybe some change, maybe like a fifth-round pick in 2025 or something like that. But I think the nuts and bolts being 28 and 60. That's more digestible to me. But again, this is a deep wide receiver class. And I don't know, I have a hard time thinking that Brian Thomas is the clear consensus wide receiver 4. Very appealing. But you're giving up a 1 and a 2 to get him? That's tough for me. But I want to explore these scenarios, and let's have realistic conversations about what it takes to get a deal like this done. And where I just keep coming back to is how many good receivers exist in the NFL right now that were not even top 20 picks. Even Justin Jefferson was we 20 pick 22? Brandon Aiyuk was picked 25? It's a deep wide receiver class. You're really going to go sell your soul for one of these top 4? I kind of struggle with it. And then there's this idea of trading for a veteran. The 2 most likely names appear to be Brandon Aiyuk and Tee Higgins. I know that people want to talk about Justin Jefferson. Why on earth would Minnesota, why would they mess around with that? That'd be crazy. I mean, Jefferson's like one of the best 5 players in the NFL. That conversation probably starts with 2 first-round picks plus more. If you're going to give up all the stuff, give it up for Justin Jefferson and not a guy that's never played a snap in the NFL. That's one thing I will say. I know that there's some very, very recent rumblings about CD Lamb and him not showing up to OTAs and all that type of stuff. Well, that doesn't feel like there's enough there yet for us to really talk about it. But I think Brandon Aiyuk and Tee Higgins, it's reasonable to discuss. We'll start with Brandon Aiyuk, who's 6 foot, 200 pounds, 26 years old. He actually just turned 26 in March. So this is his age 26 season. His production has gone up every year. He's played 4 years in the NFL, over 1,000 yards in 2022, over 1,300 yards in 2023. He's playing on the 5th-year option this season and certainly is looking for a long-term contract. Well, the 49ers are pretty tight when it comes to cap space moving forward. And we've seen them do this already, where a few years back they traded DeForest Buckner at defensive tackle to the Colts for a first-round pick to reset the money there. They wound up drafting Javon Kinlaw. Actually didn't really work out well for them, but they've shown some precedent to do this. And San Francisco right now in 2025 is projected to be over the cap by $24 million, and they've got a bunch of expiring contracts that are meaningful. One of their starting corners, Charvarius Ward, starting linebacker, Dre Greenlaw, Juwan Jennings, who's their 3rd receiver, Brandon Aiyuk, of course, an expiring contract, Aaron Banks, a starter for their offensive line, Talanoa Hufanga, who's a really good-looking young safety, plus, of course, the looming extension for Brock Purdy, who's looking like he's going to get the bag. So you can understand why this is a worthwhile conversation. I've listened to 49ers people talk about this, including Locked On 49ers, and they're not feeling like Brandon Aiyuk is going to be traded unless it was the type of deal that the 49ers couldn't refuse. Well, I think there's it's a reasonable thing to talk about based on those dynamics. And it's not like Brandon Aiyuk is wanting out of San Francisco. So I do want to clarify that, but you could see the logic here. They have other playmakers, they have expensive players on the roster, right? You can only keep so many. Then there's the Tee Higgins conversation. And candidly, I have no idea why Cincinnati is having any hard time at all about just extending him. 6'4", 220, he's 25. He just turned 25 in January. 900 yards as a rookie, over 1,000 yards in year 2 and year 3. Then last year he only had 656, partly because he missed 5 games. Then, of course, Joe Burrow missed a bunch of time as well. But the Cincinnati Bengals are brimming with cap space. I really do not understand why this is a challenge for them to get to a long-term extension. Right now, they have $23 million in available cap space, which includes the franchise tag, which is over $20 million that they have committed to Tee Higgins. They have $90 million in cap space in 2025, $187 million in 2026. How do you not just give Tee Higgins a 3-year, $80 million deal, and you obviously have the cap space to keep him, and then that puts Tee Higgins in position at 28 years old to seek another big contract? Like, to me, this would be so easy for Cincinnati. But how they do business, a little bit weird. So what would it take to get a Brandon Aiyuk or a Tee Higgins? Well, I think there's some recent trades that make a lot of sense for us to point to and say, okay, there's your blueprint. The Ravens sent pick 23. The Cardinals sent pick 23 to the Ravens for Hollywood Brown, who was 25 years old at the time. And he was coming off of a 90-catch, 1,000-yard season. The Eagles sent pick 18 and 101 to Tennessee for A.J. Brown, who was 25. The Dolphins sent 29, 50, 121, a 4 and a 6 the next year to the Chiefs for Tyreek Hill, who was 28. The Raiders sent 22 and 53 to the Raiders for Devontae Adams, who was 30 at the time. Of course, coming off of 3 monster seasons in a row. Look at the Bills when they sent the trade for Stefon Diggs. They traded 22 and 134 that year, and then a 5 and a 6 the next year for Stefon Diggs, who was 27. So what does it take to get Brandon Aiyuk or Tee Higgins? I think you part with pick 28 and then probably a 2025 third-round pick, maybe some change involved there. I think that's a reasonable conversation. 28, a 2025 3, and maybe a 4 this year, something like that, gets that done. So I think that's a worthwhile avenue to explore. And the benefit there is obviously you get a proven player in the NFL that's still young, right? 25 years old for either player. The downside is, well, now you're committing some big dollars to this player, right? You would trade for these guys and extend them for a contract that's probably $25 million a year or more. And when you trade for a contract, you trade for it as is. So you'd have to get creative about how to make that all fit. But, if the Bills wanted to go with a veteran and trade for one, I think that's what it looks like. And then there's the trade back option, which I think is very much worth considering. Probably my preference. So let's break that down here for you. We're going to do that in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. Folks, you shouldn't have to worry when you're looking to buy tickets for your next big event. Well, you don't have to, because Game Time is here for you, and it's a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They have killer deals on last-minute tickets, all-in prices, a view from your seat, and a best price guarantee. Simply put, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The app is awesome, easy to navigate. They give you flash deals, and I also love this. When you buy a ticket from Game Time, they send it straight to your phone, so you don't have to dig through emails to find it. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, I want to talk about this trade back idea. You know me, I'm a draft guy. I love draft picks. So I'm gravitated. Is that a word? I gravitate towards this idea. Partly because of some of the stuff I've already said about all these good receivers and them not being even first round picks in a class that is loaded with wide receiver talent. So you could trade back or stick and pick and take advantage of the depth of this class. And the Bills don't have that third round pick. They traded away for Rasul Douglas. They thought they were going to get a 3 as a compensatory pick for losing Tremaine Edmonds. That didn't happen. It winds up being a 4. So you'd love to recoup that while also taking advantage of the depth of this class and being mindful of, historically, the amount of good wide receivers that have come to the NFL and produced in big-time ways that were not even first-round picks. So some destinations that make sense for me. There's several. Arizona. Arizona has picks 4, 27, 35, 66, 71, 90, 104, and 138. They want to come up to 28. The Bills go back to 35. And you get pick 71 out of that. That's appealing to me. Move back to 35, take Xavier Leggete, take Lad McConkey, whatever. How about Washington? They have picks 2, 36, 40, 67, 78, 100, 139, and 152, plus more. Go back from 28 to 36 or 28 to 40, pick up 67 or 78. I'm interested in that. The Packers have picks 25, 41, 58, 88, 91, 126. Go from 28 to 41 and pick up 88. I'm interested in that. The Chargers have 5, 37, 69, 105, 110, 140, plus more. Go back from 28 to 37 and pick up 69. I do that. The Falcons, seems like they're in a win now mode. They just signed Kirk Cousins off of an Achilles tear who's in his late 30s, right? They're not here to not go and try to win. They want to come up from 43 to 28. They could send the Bills 74. Maybe some change involved there. The Eagles, they love to make trades. They have 22, 50, 53, 120, and 161. There's some opportunity there. The Rams, 19, 52, 83, 99, 154. There's plenty of different ways the Bills can get additional draft capital, meaningful draft capital, and still get an answer at wide receiver. And then what I think you do is, right now the Bills have 10 draft picks. So it's not like they need to trade back to get more picks. But I think you trade back and then up. Go from 28 to 35, pick up 71, and then move up from 60 and 71, something like that, with your day 3 picks that you have. That's the type of stuff that gets me really excited. I have a lot of questions about Brian Thomas. He's a likable prospect. I don't have as many questions about Odunze, Nabers, or Harrison, but I have a lot of questions about giving up 4 starters to get 1, right? To me, this is where the logic comes into play. Drafting is hard, man. I've been studying the draft for a long, long time. It is hard. It is a crapshoot. It is hard to know what a young man in their early 20s is going to do when they become rich and have all kinds of free time. You have no idea how people are going to respond to that. Give yourself as many darts to throw. Give yourself as many darts to throw. And sometimes those darts are Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard and Christian Benford. Sometimes they're Kyrie Elam and Boogie Basham. I get it. It goes both ways. That's why you give yourself as many darts to throw at the board as possible to find yourself hits. The NFL has been finding meaningful talent throughout every draft for the history of the league. Give yourself as many opportunities to get that meaningful talent. Because boy, oh boy, could you imagine moving way up for one of these receivers and then they're not very good? But then I know you're here saying, well, Joe, what if they are very good? Yeah, I hear that too. I hope they would be if that's the case. I want to give myself as many chances as possible to hit on picks, especially with premium draft capital. So Brandon Beane's got a lot to figure out. That's why they pay him the big bucks, but these are some of the options that surely he's thinking about and exploring. And I'm very excited to see what he winds up doing, because we can speculate on what he's going to do. He's going to do something. He's going to do something. We started this conversation talking about the opportunities that exist in this passing game. It's a big hole to fill. It's a big question to answer. Something's coming. And I think something is along the lines of what we just discussed. And hopefully that positions you well to consider your own preferences and ask yourself the question, what should Brandon Beane do? All right, folks, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.